The wind howled like a wounded beast through the Montana mountains, carrying with it sheets of snow that cut through Sarah Bennett's worn wool coat like 1,000 tiny knives. Her arms ached from carrying little Thomas, who had stopped crying hours ago, a mercy, she thought, though the silence frightened her more than his wails ever could. "Just a little further, baby," she whispered against his pale cheek, though she had no idea where further might lead. The wagon had broken its axle 3 days back, and her husband, William. She squeezed her eyes shut against the memory of his body, stiff and cold beneath the makeshift cairn of stones she'd managed to pile over him before the wolves came sniffing. The fever had taken him quick, Lord be thanked for that small blessing, but it left her alone with a 4-year-old boy in the middle of nowhere, with winter bearing down on them like God's own judgment. Sarah stumbled, her frozen feet catching on something buried beneath the snow. She went down hard on one knee, clutching Thomas tight against her chest to shield him from the fall. The impact sent lightning bolts of pain up her leg, and she bit back a sob. No use crying. Tears would only freeze on her face. "Mama." Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm all right, sweetheart. Mama's all right." But she wasn't. She couldn't feel her toes anymore, and her fingers were going the same way. The meager supplies from the wagon had run out yesterday morning. She'd given Thomas the last of the hardtack and melted snow for him to drink, but her own stomach cramped with hunger. Through the swirling white, she thought she saw something dark against the mountainside. A cave, maybe, or just another trick of her snow-blind eyes. She forced herself up, each step a monumental effort. It wasn't a cave, it was smoke. Sarah's heart leaped, then plummeted just as quick. Smoke meant people. But what kind of people? The territories were full of men who'd slit your throat for the clothes on your back. A woman alone with a child? She shuddered, and not from the cold. But what choice did she have? Die out here for certain, or take her chances with whoever had built that fire? She pressed forward, following the thin gray thread rising through the trees. Her legs moved mechanical-like, one foot in front of the other, while her mind conjured up all manner of horrors waiting for her. Bandits, claim jumpers, Indians on the warpath, though she'd heard they mostly kept to themselves unless provoked. The trees opened into a small clearing, and there it sat, a rough-hewn log cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney. No fancy windows, just oiled paper letting out a dim glow. A lean-to on one side sheltered split wood, and she could make out the dark shapes of pelts stretched on frames. A trapper's cabin. Her heart sank further. Trappers were a peculiar breed, half wild from living alone in the mountains, more comfortable with beasts than people. William had warned her about them, back when warnings mattered. But Thomas whimpered in her arms, and that decided it. She stumbled to the heavy wooden door and knocked, the sound barely audible over the wind. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time, using the last of her strength. The door swung open so sudden she nearly fell forward. A man filled the doorway, and Sarah had to tilt her head back to see his face. Lord Almighty. He was the biggest man she'd ever laid eyes on. 6.5 feet if he was an inch, shoulders broad as an oak beam, dressed in buckskins and fur. A thick beard covered most of his face, dark as coal and streaked with silver, though he couldn't be more than 40 years. His eyes were gray as the winter sky, and just as cold. He stared at her for a long moment, taking in her snow-covered form, the child in her arms, the desperation written plain on her face. Then his gaze traveled past her to the empty clearing, checking for others. "Please," Sarah managed through chattering teeth. "My boy." The man's eyes dropped to Thomas, whose lips had gone blue. Something shifted in that granite face. Not softness, exactly, but a crack in the stone. "Get in," he growled, voice rough as gravel from disuse. Sarah didn't need telling twice. She stumbled past him into blessed warmth. The cabin's interior was sparse, but clean, a stone fireplace with a good blaze going, A rough table and bench, a bed of furs in one corner. Animal pelts covered the walls, and dried meat hung from the rafters. It smelled of smoke and leather and something wild. The man shut the door against the storm and moved past her to throw more wood on the fire. Sarah stood there swaying, afraid if she sat down she might never get up again. "The boy's half froze," the man said without looking at her. "Strip him down and wrap him in them furs by the fire. You too." Sarah's hands fumbled with Thomas's wet clothes. The man watched her struggle for a moment, then made an impatient sound and strode over. His massive hands were surprisingly gentle as he helped peel away the frozen layers, revealing her son's pale, thin body. "He ain't eaten recent," the man observed.
3 days,
Sarah whispered.
maybe 4. I gave him the last.
The man grunted and wrapped Thomas in a thick bearskin, setting him close to the fire but not too close. Then he turned those gray eyes on her. "Your turn." Sarah's face flushed despite the cold.
I can manage.
"You can't barely stand. Pride'll kill you sure as the cold." He gestured impatiently. "I seen plenty of half-dead folks in my time. Ain't nothing under them clothes I ain't seen before." There was no heat in his words, just flat practicality. Sarah's frozen fingers wouldn't work the buttons anyway. She let him help her out of the sodden coat and dress, down to her shift, before her modesty won out.
That'll do,
she said firmly, though her voice shook. He draped a wolf pelt around her shoulders and pushed her down onto a log bench by the fire. The warmth hit her like a physical blow, and she gasped as feeling started returning to her extremities. It hurt something fierce. The man moved about the cabin with surprising quiet for his size, heating water in a pot, adding something from a leather pouch. The smell of herbs filled the air. "Drink," he ordered, pressing a tin cup into her hands. "It'll warm you from inside." The tea was bitter but hot, and Sarah felt it trace a line of fire down to her empty stomach. The man gave her a smaller cup for Thomas, who sipped it weakly but kept it down.
"Thank you,"
Sarah said when she could speak without her teeth chattering.
"We'd have died out there."
The man shrugged, busy cutting strips from a haunch of dried venison. "Maybe, maybe not. Folks are tougher than they figure sometimes." He handed her the meat. Sarah wanted to fall on it like a wild animal, but she broke off small pieces for Thomas first, making sure he chewed slow and careful. Only then did she allow herself to eat. "Where's your man?" the trapper asked, sudden-like.
Sarah's throat closed up. "Dead. 3 days back, the fever took him."
"And you're headed where?" "Oregon Territory. My sister and her husband have a claim there." The words sounded foolish now, spoken aloud. Oregon might as well be the moon. The man studied her with those unreadable eyes. "Oregon's 1,000 miles or more, through mountains and Indian Territory. In winter."
"I know."
"With a half-starved boy and no supplies." "I know." He was quiet for a long spell, just the crack of the fire and the wind howling outside. Sarah pulled Thomas closer, feeling his small body start to warm against hers. "You can't stay here," the man said finally. Sarah's heart sank, though she'd expected as much.
"Just tonight, please, when the storm breaks."
"You don't understand. Woman." His voice had gone hard as iron. "I don't keep company, not with anyone, especially not with a woman and child. We won't be any trouble." He stood abruptly, and Sarah shrank back despite herself. Lord, he was big. He could break her in half with one hand. "I live alone for a reason," he said, each word dropping like a stone. "Been that way for nigh on 10 years, and I aim to keep it that way." "Then why did you let us in?" He had no answer for that, just stood there glowering at her like she was a problem he didn't know how to solve. Sarah gathered her courage. "I'm not asking for charity. I can work, cook, clean, mend, just until spring." "No. My boy will die out there. Not my concern." But even as he said it, his eyes flicked to Thomas, who'd fallen asleep against Sarah's chest, and that crack in the stone widened just a hair.
"Please,"
Sarah said softly.
"I'm begging you, not for me, for him."
The man turned away, hands clenched into fists. When he spoke again, his voice was different, rougher, dangerous. There'd be conditions. Sarah's blood chilled. She'd known this was coming, had known the moment she knocked on that door what the price might be. A woman alone had only one thing to bargain with. "What kind of conditions?" she asked, though her heart already knew. He turned back to her, and there was something wild in those gray eyes now, something hungry and desperate and edged with an anger she didn't understand. "You want shelter, food, protection through the winter?" Each word came out sharp as broken glass. "Then you'll pay for it. Your body is mine until I have my sons. 2 of them. Strong boys to carry on when I'm gone. That's the price of survival. Woman, take it or leave it." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sarah clutched Thomas tighter, feeling the world tilt beneath her feet. Outside, the storm raged on, promising death as certain as sunrise. Inside, this wild man offered life at a price that would damn her soul. But Thomas stirred in her arms, murmuring something about being warm, and Sarah knew she'd already made her choice. She'd made it the moment William breathed his last. She'd do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep her boy alive. "I accept," she whispered. The man nodded once, sharp and final, like the closing of a trap. "Name's Josiah Pike," he said. "You'll call me Pike, and you'll follow my rules, every last one. Or you'll be back in that storm faster than spit. Understood?" "Yes." "The boy sleeps there." He pointed to a corner near the fire. "You sleep where I tell you. You don't touch nothing without asking. You don't go outside without my say-so. You do the work I give you and you don't complain. And when I want what I want, you don't refuse." Each rule fell like a hammer blow, but Sarah kept her back straight. "I understand." Pike studied her for another long moment, then turned away. "Get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow you start earning your keep." Sarah settled Thomas onto a pile of furs near the fire, kissing his forehead as he mumbled in his sleep. Then she sat back on her heels, staring into the flames, wondering what she'd just agreed to, wondering if she'd traded one death for another. Behind her, Pike moved about the cabin, banking the fire, checking the door. Such a strange man, hard as the mountains themselves. Yet he'd taken them in, and that look when he'd spoken of sons, there was pain there, old and deep. Well, she had her own pain, her own losses, and if bearing this man's children was the price of Thomas's life, she'd pay it. She'd survived William's death and the storm. She'd survive this too. The wind screamed outside, but inside the cabin was warm. For tonight, that was enough. Sarah woke to gray dawn light filtering through the oiled paper window and the sound of an axe biting into wood. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. Then the events of the night before came rushing back, and her stomach clenched with dread. Thomas still slept peacefully in his nest of furs. Color returned to his cheeks. Thank the Lord for that mercy. At least, Sarah rose stiffly, her body protesting every movement. The wolf pelt slipped from her shoulders, and she shivered in her thin shift. Her dress hung by the fire, dry but stiff with cold. She pulled it on quickly, fingers fumbling with the buttons, then wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders. The cabin was cold despite the banked embers in the fireplace. Pike came through the door with an armload of split wood, bringing with him a gust of frigid air. He glanced at her once, then went about building up the fire without a word. Sarah watched him work, noting the efficient way he moved, every action purposeful. "There's a bucket by the door," he said without looking at her. "Stream's out back, about 30 paces. Don't wander further." Sarah found the bucket and stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in white. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but the air was clear and sharp. She followed a packed trail through the snow to where a small stream gurgled between ice-rimmed banks. When she returned, Pike had porridge bubbling in a pot over the fire. He ladled out 2 bowls without ceremony. "Wake the boy," he said. "He needs to eat." Thomas woke slowly, confused and clingy. Sarah soothed him as best she could, spooning warm porridge into his mouth while he stared wide-eyed at Pike. "Who's that man, Mama?" he whispered.
Mr. Pike,
Sarah said carefully.
he's helping us.
Pike snorted but said nothing. After breakfast, he stood and fixed Sarah with that hard stare. "Time you learned the rules proper." He showed her around the cabin, pointing out where things were kept and how he wanted them maintained. The man had a system for everything. Firewood stacked just so. Pelts sorted by type and size, tools cleaned and placed exact, food stores organized with military precision. "You'll cook morning and evening," he said. "I trap during the day, but I'll be close enough to hear if you holler. The boy can help with small chores when he's stronger." Sarah nodded, trying to memorize everything. The cabin was larger than she'd first thought, with a small lean-to storage room and a root cellar beneath. But it was still just one room for living, and the bed in the corner loomed large in her peripheral vision. "Washing's done in the stream when weather permits," Pike continued. "Otherwise, you heat water. Mending baskets there. I'll expect my clothes patched proper." He pulled down a rifle from pegs on the wall. "You know how to shoot." "My husband taught me," Sarah said quietly. "Good. This stays loaded by the door. You see anyone coming who ain't me, you bar the door and shoot if they try to enter. No questions. No hesitation. Understood." The weight of his words settled on her.
Do people come here often?
"No, that's how I like it. But winter makes men desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." He set the rifle back and turned to face her full on. "Now, about our arrangement." Sarah's mouth went dry. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I meant what I said. I want sons, 2 strong boys. But I ain't no animal. It won't be tonight. You need time to settle. Get your strength back. But don't think I've forgotten or changed my mind." Relief and dread warred in Sarah's chest. A reprieve, but not a pardon. "There's women's things in that trunk." Pike gestured to a battered chest in the corner. "Don't know if they'll fit, but they're better than what you got." Sarah's curiosity sparked despite everything. "Women's things." His face closed off like a door slamming shut.
Just see if they fit.
He grabbed his coat and gear. "I'll be checking traps. Should be back by dark. Bar the door behind me." Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with Thomas and a cabin full of questions. The trunk drew her like a magnet. Inside, carefully folded, were 2 dresses, undergarments, a heavy wool cloak, and even a pair of proper boots. Everything was well made and cared for, though the styles were some years out of date. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a Bible with a pressed flower between its pages. Sarah lifted out one of the dresses, a practical brown wool that looked about her size. As she did, something fell from its folds. A small daguerreotype in a tarnished frame. A woman's face stared up at her, young, pretty, with dark hair and gentle eyes. On the back, in careful script, Elizabeth Pike, 1867. His wife had to be. "Mama, can I play?" Thomas asked, and Sarah quickly tucked the photograph back.
"Yes, sweetheart, but stay where I can see you."
She spent the morning exploring her new domain, trying to understand the man who owned it. Everything spoke of solitary years, single plate, single cup, one chair by the fire. But underneath, like tracks in old snow, were signs of a different life. Notches on the door frame at a child's height. A wooden toy horse, roughly carved, shoved behind the wood box. Those women's clothes, kept clean and safe all these years. The larder was well stocked. Smoked meat, dried beans, flour, salt, even some precious sugar and coffee. Sarah set about making a proper noon meal, finding comfort in familiar work. Thomas helped as much as a 4-year-old could, chattering about the big man and asking when they'd see Papa again. That question she couldn't answer. Pike returned as shadows grew long, bringing 2 rabbits and a surly mood. He skinned the game outside with quick, efficient strokes while Sarah finished supper. When he came in, he paused at the smell of biscuits baking.
Haven't had biscuits in years,
he said, almost to himself. They ate in silence, but Sarah caught him watching Thomas, who was busy making a game of his food. Something flickered in those gray eyes, not quite softness, but a kind of confused pain.
Boy needs to learn useful things,
Pike said abruptly. Can't have him underfoot doing nothing.
He's only 4,
Sarah protested. Old enough to fetch kindling, feed a fire, sort pelts. I was trapping with my PA at 5. Sarah bit back her argument. This was Pike's domain, his rules. After supper, Pike produced a pack of worn and playing cards. You play. A little. They played simple games while Thomas curled sleepy against Sarah's side. It was almost peaceful, almost like a real family, if she didn't think too hard about why she was here. When Thomas's eyes drooped shut, Sarah carried him to his furs. Pike watched her tuck the boy in, his expression unreadable. He's a good boy, Pike said quietly. Reminds me. But he didn't finish. Instead, he stood abruptly and went to the door. I'll be outside. Got pelts to check. Sarah understood. He was giving her privacy to prepare for bed. She changed quickly into the nightgown from the trunk, Elizabeth's nightgown, trying not to think about the woman who'd worn it before. When Pike returned, she was already under the covers on the far side of the bed, turned toward the wall. She heard him bank the fire, check the door bar, then felt the bed dip under his weight. He stayed on his side, not touching her, but she could feel the heat of him across the small space. Her name was Elizabeth, he said into the darkness. My wife died 8 years ago, birthing our second. The first went with her, boys, both of them. Sarah lay very still, hardly breathing. Told myself I was done with all that, done with wanting things that could be took away. But a man gets old alone in the mountains, starts thinking about what he'll leave behind, who'll remember his name. The silence stretched between them, heavy with grief and understanding. Sarah thought of William, of the dreams they'd shared, the children they'd planned. All of it gone now, buried under Montana snow. I'm sorry, she whispered. Pike made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's wash day if the weather holds. Sarah closed her eyes, acutely aware of every sound he made, every shift of the bed, but true to his word. He kept to his side. Eventually, exhaustion won, and she slept. The days fell into a pattern. Pike left early to check his trap lines. Sarah cooked, cleaned, mended, minded Thomas, the boy, resilient as children are, adapted quickly. He followed Sarah around, helping with small tasks, chattering about everything and nothing. Pike remained distant, but not unkind. He carved Thomas a set of animals from pine wood. He brought back herbs Sarah mentioned needing for cooking. He fixed a drafty spot in the wall without being asked. But he watched her always with those gray eyes, calculating, waiting. One afternoon, while sorting furs as Pike had taught her, Sarah found Thomas trying to lift the big skinning knife.
No,
She snatched it away, heart pounding.
you mustn't touch Mr. Pike's tools.
I want to help like Papa, Thomas said, lip quivering. Mr. Pike isn't Papa, sweetheart. He could be, Thomas said with a child's simple logic. If he wanted. That evening, Pike noticed his tools had been disturbed. His face darkened, and Sarah quickly explained, Boy needs to learn proper, he said. Can't have him grabbing at dangerous things. He took Thomas outside and showed him how to hold a knife safe, how to respect the blade. Thomas listened with rapt attention, small face serious. When they came back in, Thomas was glowing with pride. "Mr. Pike says I can have my own knife when I'm bigger." Sarah met Pike's eyes over the boy's head. Something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or just shared recognition of a child's need for guidance. That night, as they lay in their separate territories of the bed, Pike spoke again. "You're a good mother. The boy's lucky."
Thank you.
Sarah managed past the lump in her throat. "Spring's still months off. You might adjust to things here by then." The unspoken hung between them. His expectations, her debt, the bargain that would come due. Sarah stared into the darkness, thinking of Thomas's smile when Pike taught him about knives, thinking of the patient way Pike had answered the boy's endless questions, thinking of those notches on the door frame and the wooden horse hidden away. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe I will." The weeks passed in a rhythm of survival. Snow fell steady, piling high against the cabin walls until the windows were half buried. Sarah learned Pike's ways. When he wanted coffee, how he liked his meat cooked, which shirts needed mending first. She learned the mountains' moods too, the way the wind changed before a storm, how the trees creaked different when loaded with snow. Thomas thrived despite the isolation. He followed Pike around like a shadow when the man was home, absorbing everything. Pike taught him to stack kindling proper, to bank a fire so it'd last the night, to tell rabbit tracks from squirrel. The boy's chatter, which Sarah feared would annoy the taciturn man, seemed to amuse him instead. "Mr. Pike, why do bears sleep all winter?" Thomas asked one evening, perched on a log while Pike cleaned his rifle. "They ain't exactly sleeping," Pike explained, hands never pausing in their work. "More like slowing down, living off their fat, smart, really. Why work for food when you can just sleep through the hungry times?" "Could I do that?" Pike's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You ain't got enough fat on you, boy. Skinny as a willow switch." Thomas giggled, and Sarah felt her heart twist. Her son was getting attached, and she couldn't blame him. Pike was the first man to show him patience since William died. But what would happen when spring came, when they left, or worse? What would happen if they stayed? One morning, Sarah woke to find Pike still in bed, burning with fever. His normally bronze skin was flushed and clammy, his breathing labored. "Just a chill," he growled when she pressed a hand to his forehead. "I'll be fine." But he wasn't fine. By noon, he was delirious, muttering about Elizabeth and the boys, reaching for people who weren't there. Sarah had seen fever take strong men before, had buried William because of it. Fear clawed at her throat. She threw off her shawl and set to work, melted snow for water, steeped willow bark tea, kept cool cloths on his head. Thomas helped, fetching things with a solemnity beyond his years. "Is Mr. Pike gonna die like Papa?" he asked quietly. "No," Sarah said firmly, though she wasn't sure. "We're going to take care of him." For 2 days and nights, she barely left his side. She spooned broth between his cracked lips, changed his sweat-soaked clothes, held him down when the fever dreams made him thrash. He was strong, even sick, and it took all her weight to keep him from hurting himself. On the second night, the fever broke. Pike's eyes opened, clear for the first time, and found her face. "Sarah!" His voice was raw. "I'm here. The fever's passing." He tried to sit up, grimaced, fell back. "The boy." "Thomas is fine, sleeping by the fire." Pike closed his eyes. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed." "Coulda let me die, taken what you needed and left." The thought hadn't even occurred to her, and she said so. He studied her with those gray eyes, something shifting in their depths. "Why?" he asked simply. Sarah smoothed the blanket. Buying time. Why indeed this man had claimed her, made her his by frontier law. She should hate him. But she'd seen him teaching Thomas, patient and kind. She'd watched him carve toys by firelight. She'd heard him cry out for his dead children in fever dreams. "You saved us," she said finally. Wouldn't be Christian to repay that with abandonment. "That all?" She met his gaze steady. "You're a good man. Pike, hard, but good. I don't believe you'd hurt us. Not truly." He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "Don't be so sure about that." But his hand found hers on the blanket, rough fingers gentle, and he squeezed once before letting go. Pike recovered slowly. For a week, he could barely stand, weak as a newborn calf. It chafed at him something fierce, being dependent. Sarah saw it in the set of his jaw when she helped him to the privy, the way his hands clenched when Thomas had to fetch his things. "Stop fussing, woman," he growled the fourth day. "I ain't an invalid." "You nearly died," Sarah shot back, surprising herself with her firmness. "You'll rest until you're healed proper, or I'll tie you to that bed." Pike stared at her, and she braced for anger. Instead, that almost smile appeared. "Bossy little thing, aren't you?" "When I need to be." Something warm flickered in his eyes before he turned away. "Well, get on with it then." During his convalescence, the boundaries shifted. Sarah found herself sitting closer to him in the evenings, talking easier. Pike told her about trapping, about reading the weather, about which plants could heal and which could kill. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, her sister in Oregon, the dreams she'd had before the world turned hard. Thomas bloomed under the attention of two adults. He practiced his letters with Sarah and learned knots from Pike. He played elaborate games with his carved animals, making up stories that sometimes featured a mama, a papa, and a little boy living happy in a cabin. Sarah caught Pike watching these games with a peculiar expression, longing mixed with pain. "He's forgetting," Pike said one night. "About his real PA." "He's young," Sarah replied carefully. "Children adapt." "That what you're doing adapting?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Sarah considered her answer. Was she adapting the life she'd imagined was gone, buried with William? But this life, hard as it was, strange as it was, had its own rhythms, its own small contentments. "Maybe," she admitted. "Is that so wrong?" Pike turned to look at her full on. "What about our bargain?" Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd let herself forget. These past weeks. Let herself pretend this was real, chosen, instead of traded for survival. "I haven't forgotten," she said quietly. But I see you with Thomas, how you are with him. You'd be," she swallowed hard, "you'd be a good father, to any children." Pike was quiet for a long moment. "Elizabeth used to say that, before." His voice roughened. "Didn't save them, though. Didn't stop them dying." "That wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it I brought her here, to this hard place, put babies in her belly when I should have known better?" His hands clenched. "I failed them all." Sarah reached out without thinking, covered his fisted hand with hers. "You didn't fail anyone. Sometimes people just die. No fault, no blame, just life being cruel." Pike stared at their joined hands like he'd never seen such a thing. Slowly, his fingers uncurled, turned to grasp hers. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, I'd go mad thinking about William, about all the things I should have done different." They sat that way for a while, hands clasped, sharing grief without words. Finally, Pike pulled away, but gentle-like. "You're a good woman, Sarah Bennett, better than I deserve." "You're not as hard as you pretend, Josiah Pike." He flinched at the use of his given name. "Don't mistake necessity for softness. I still mean to have what I bargained for." But the words lacked conviction, and they both knew it. Something had changed during his illness. The transaction had become complicated. That night, as they lay in bed, Pike spoke into the darkness. "When I was fevered, did I say things?" "You called for Elizabeth, for your boys." A sharp inhale. "What else?" Sarah hesitated, then decided on truth. "You begged them to forgive you, said you were sorry, over and over." Pike was silent so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, so quiet, she almost missed it. "Are they forgiven me?" "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that love forgives everything. And they loved you. Anyone could see that in how you speak of them." She felt him turn toward her in the dark, felt the bed shift as he moved closer. Not touching, but close enough she could feel his warmth. "What about you?" he asked. "Could you forgive a man who took advantage, who made a devil's bargain with a desperate woman?" Sarah's heart pounded. "Are you asking me to—" Maybe I'm asking if such a thing is possible." She turned toward him, though she couldn't see his face in the darkness. "I think," she said slowly, "that forgiveness comes easier when a person shows they've changed, when they prove themselves different than they were." "And have I proved myself?" Sarah thought of his patience with Thomas, his gentleness during her exhaustion, the vulnerability he'd shown in his fever. "You're proving it every day." Pike's hand found hers under the covers. "I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want to do right by you, by the boy. But I don't know how. Been alone too long. Forgotten how to be decent." "You haven't forgotten. You just haven't had reason to try." His thumb stroked across her knuckles, a question in the touch. Sarah's breath caught. This was different than their bargain. This was something else, something that might grow into choosing. "Sarah," he said, and her name was a prayer and a question all at once. "Not yet," she whispered. Not yet, but maybe, when it's not about bargains anymore, when it's just about us." Pike squeezed her hand once, understanding, then rolled back to his side of the bed, but he kept hold of her hand, and Sarah fell asleep to the rhythm of his breathing, feeling safer than she had since before William took sick. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, but inside the cabin was warm. A fragile peace had taken root, delicate as spring flowers under snow. Whether it would survive the hard months ahead, only time would tell. But for now, it was enough. The storm came 3 days later, worse than any before it. Sarah had learned to read the signs, the way Pike checked and rechecked the wood pile, how he brought in extra water and secured every loose board. But nothing could have prepared her for the fury that descended. It started at midday, the sky going dark as night. Wind slammed into the cabin like giant fists, making the walls groan. Snow didn't fall so much as fly horizontal, a white wall of ice and rage. "Get away from the windows," Pike ordered, pulling Thomas back from the oiled paper that buckled inward with each gust. They huddled by the fire as the storm intensified. The chimney howled like a wounded beast, occasionally sending smoke billowing back into the room. Thomas clung to Sarah, eyes wide with terror every time the cabin shuddered. "Is it gonna blow us away, Mama?" "No, sweetheart, Mr. Pike built this cabin strong." Pike grunted agreement, but Sarah saw the worry in his eyes as a particularly vicious gust made the roof beams creak. He'd been through many storms. She could tell, but this was different. By nightfall, the temperature had plummeted so fierce that frost formed on the inside walls. The fire, usually more than enough, barely held back the cold. Pike brought out every fur and blanket, creating a nest close to the hearth. "We'll sleep here tonight," he said. "All of us together. Only way to keep warm enough." Sarah understood. This wasn't about propriety or bargains. This was survival. She settled Thomas between them, wrapped in the warmest furs, then lay down beside him. Pike stretched out on the boy's other side, his bulk blocking the worst of the drafts. The storm raged on, sometime in the night. Sarah woke to find Thomas shivering despite the furs. Without thinking, she pulled him closer, and found Pike doing the same from the other side. Their hands met over the child's small body. "He's too cold," Sarah whispered, fear threading her voice. Pike didn't hesitate. He shifted closer, pulling both Sarah and Thomas against his chest, wrapping his arms around them both. "Body heat," he said gruffly. Best way to warm him. Sarah stiffened at the sudden intimacy, but Thomas immediately burrowed into Pike's warmth with a contented sigh. She forced herself to relax, pressing close to add her own heat to the cocoon they'd formed around her son. Pike's chest was solid against her cheek, his heartbeat steady beneath her palm where it rested over Thomas. He smelled of wood smoke and leather and something uniquely him. Safe. Her mind supplied unbidden. He smelled safe. "Better," Pike's voice rumbled through his chest. "Yes," Sarah whispered. They lay quiet, listening to the storm's fury. Thomas had stopped shivering, his breathing deep and even between them. Sarah should have been terrified. The storm, the closeness, the way her body seemed to fit against Pike's like it belonged there. But she wasn't. She was warm and protected and strangely at peace. "Sarah," Pike's breath stirred her hair. "I've been thinking about what you said, about proving myself different." She held still, waiting. "I ain't good with words. Never have been. But I want you to know." He paused, struggling. "You and the boy. You matter. More than the bargain. More than what I thought I wanted." Sarah's throat tightened. "Pike." "Josiah," he corrected quietly. "Think maybe you could call me Josiah when it's just us." It was such a simple request, but Sarah heard the weight of it. The invitation, the vulnerability of a man who'd locked himself away for years, finally opening the door. "All right, Josiah." His arms tightened fractionally around them. "Thank you." They dozed fitfully as the storm hammered on. Once, a terrible crack split the air, and Pike was up instantly, grabbing a lantern. "Tree fell," he said after checking. "Hit the lean-to. Damage ain't too bad, but I'll need to clear it come morning." He settled back down, pulling them close again without hesitation. This time, Sarah didn't stiffen at all. She was too grateful for his warmth, his presence, his steady strength in the face of nature's fury. Thomas woke once, whimpering from a nightmare, before Sarah could even move. Pike's hand was smoothing the boy's hair. "Shh, little man. Just the wind telling stories. You're safe. Mama's here. I'm here." "Papa," Thomas mumbled, still half asleep. Sarah's breath caught, but Pike just continued his gentle stroking. "Yeah, boy, I'm here. Go back to sleep." Thomas settled immediately, small hand clutching Pike's shirt. Sarah met Pike's eyes over the child's head, saw the storm of emotion there. Surprise, longing, fear, hope. "He doesn't know what he's saying," Sarah whispered. "Maybe not," Pike replied. "But maybe he knows something we don't." The wind screamed louder, and something heavy hit the roof. Pike tensed, ready to investigate, but the roof held. He relaxed incrementally, nose brushing Sarah's hair as he checked the rafters above. "Built her strong," he murmured. "She'll hold." Sarah wasn't sure if he meant the cabin or something else entirely. The worst came near dawn. The wind reached a pitch that seemed impossible, a sound like the world tearing apart. The cabin door, barred and reinforced, bulged inward with each gust. Snow forced its way through every tiny gap, creating little drifts in the corners. Thomas woke crying, terrified. Sarah tried to soothe him, but her own fear made her voice shake. Then Pike started talking, low and steady, telling a story about a brave little rabbit who survived a terrible storm by being smart and patient. His voice never wavered, even when a section of roof began to lift and slam back down. "The rabbit knew," Pike continued calmly, "that storms always end, sun always comes back, just gotta hold on and trust." Gradually, Thomas calmed, mesmerized by the story. Sarah found herself listening too, drawing strength from Pike's certainty. He'd survived countless storms alone in this cabin. They'd survive this one together. Finally, blessedly, the wind began to ease, not all at once, but in stages, like a wild animal slowly tiring. By full dawn, it had dropped to merely fierce instead of apocalyptic. Pike untangled himself carefully and went to survey the damage. Sarah heard him moving outside, the thud of his axe clearing debris. When he came back, he was covered in snow but smiling, actually smiling. Damage ain't as bad as it sounded. Lost some shingles, and the lean-to needs work. But we're solid. Seen worse. Sarah sagged with relief. They'd made it. All of them. Together. The storm had changed things. Not just the landscape, buried under feet of new snow, but the dynamics in the cabin. The forced intimacy of that night had broken down walls that might have stood for months otherwise. Thomas now called Pike Pa half the time, and Pike never corrected him. The man's whole demeanor had shifted, like the storm had scoured away the last of his resistance to caring. He smiled more, touched easier, a hand on Thomas's head, fingers brushing Sarah's as she handed him coffee. That night, as they prepared for bed in their usual spots, Thomas in his furs, Sarah and Pike in the bed, the boy spoke up. Can't we sleep like last night altogether? It was warm. Sarah started to explain why that was just for the storm, but Pike interrupted. Don't see why not. Cold enough still. So they arranged themselves by the fire again, Thomas between them but no storm forcing closeness. Yet, somehow, they ended up just as tangled. Thomas sprawled across them both, Sarah's head on Pike's shoulder, his arm around them both like it was the most natural thing in the world. Josiah, Sarah whispered after Thomas fell asleep. What you said in the storm, about us mattering, meant it. More than the bargain. He was quiet for a long moment. There ain't no bargain anymore. Sarah, hasn't been for a while now. Just took me time to see it. Sarah's heart pounded. Then what is there? His hand found hers in the dark, fingers intertwining. Whatever we choose, whatever you want there to be. And if I don't know yet? Then we wait. Got all winter to figure it out. All the time in the world. Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling something loosen in her chest. The bargain that had bound them was gone, swept away like snow in the wind. What remained was possibility, fragile and new, but real. Outside, the wind had died to a whisper, and stars appeared between racing clouds. The storm had passed, leaving the world changed but intact. Inside the cabin, 3 people who'd been strangers mere months ago lay entwined, creating their own warmth against the cold. It wasn't the life Sarah had planned. It wasn't the family she'd lost. But maybe, just maybe, it was the one she was meant to find, here in this cabin at the end of the world, with a man who'd forgotten how to love learning to remember, and a boy who needed a father finding one in the most unlikely place. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah closed her eyes, listening to Thomas's peaceful breathing and Josiah's steady heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, repairs to make, paths to clear, life to continue living. But tonight, they were warm and safe and together. For now, that was enough. For now, that was everything. The riders came on a clear morning 2 weeks after the storm. Sarah was hauling water from the stream when she heard horses. 3, maybe 4. Her blood turned to ice. Pike was checking his Farda trap line. Wouldn't be back until dark. She dropped the bucket and ran for the cabin, Thomas playing by the woodpile. Inside, now, she hissed, scooping him up. But Mama, quiet. She barred the door and grabbed the rifle from its pegs, hands shaking as she checked the load. Through a crack in the oiled paper, she could see them, 4 men, rough-looking, the kind that lived on the edges of law and decency. They dismounted in the clearing, looking around with the casual arrogance of men who took what they wanted. "Hello, the cabin," one called. "We know you're in there. Seen the smoke. Just looking for some hospitality on a cold day." Sarah recognized the type. They'd be friendly until they weren't, until they realized a woman was alone. "State your business and move on," she called back, deepening her voice as much as she could. Low laughter.
That ain't no man's voice. Come on out, little lady. We don't mean no harm, just cold and hungry.
"My husband will be back any moment, with friends." "Sure he will." The leader, a lean man with dead eyes, moved closer. "How about you open this door nice and peaceful? Share some of that stew we can smell. We'll be on our way right quick."
Thomas whimpered, and Sarah pressed him behind her. Through the crack, she saw the men spreading out, surrounding the cabin. Her heart hammered, but her hands steadied on the rifle. Pike had taught her well. Breathe slow. Squeeze gentle. Aim for center mass.
"Last warning," she called. "Move on, or I'll shoot." More laughter. "4 of us, 1 of you. And I'm betting you ain't never shot a man, have you, sweetheart?" The lean one nodded to his companions. 2 moved toward the door while 1 circled toward the window. Sarah made her decision. She shoved the rifle barrel through a gap in the door and fired. The man approaching jerked back with a howl, clutching his shoulder. The others dove for cover.
That's 1,
Sarah called, reloading with practiced movements.
Who wants to be second?
Cursing filled the air. She'd drawn blood, changed the game. These men were scavengers, looking for easy prey. A woman who could shoot back wasn't part of their plan. "You're gonna regret that, woman," the leader snarled. "Could have been nice about this. Now we're gonna—" A rifle crack from the trees cut him off. One of the men by the horses screamed, spinning to the ground. Another shot, and a 3rd man dropped. Pike emerged from the forest like God's own wrath, moving with deadly purpose. He'd heard the shot. Come running. The leader tried to draw, but Pike was already on him, rifle butt crashing into his face with a wet crunch. It was over in seconds. 2 men dead, 1 moaning with Sarah's bullet in his shoulder. The leader sprawled unconscious with his face a ruin. Pike checked each man with cold efficiency, kicking weapons away. Only then did he turn to the cabin. "Sarah, you hurt." She unbarred the door with trembling hands. "We're fine. They came and you were gone and I—" Pike crossed to her in 2 strides, hands running over her and Thomas, checking for injury, finding none. He pulled them both against him, crushing them close. "You did good," he said rough. "You did so good. Protected our boy. Protected yourself." "Our boy." The words penetrated Sarah's shock. She started to shake then, the rifle slipping from numb fingers. Pike caught it, set it aside, held her tighter. "I shot a man," she whispered. "You protected your family," Pike corrected firmly. "Nothing more, nothing less." The wounded man groaned, trying to crawl toward his horse. Pike's expression went cold as winter. He settled Sarah and Thomas by the fire, then went back outside. She heard low voices. Pike's dangerous calm, the man's pleading, then silence. When Pike returned, he was alone. "They won't trouble nobody else," was all he said. He dealt with the bodies while Sarah tried to stop shaking. Thomas clung to her, sensing something terrible had happened, but not understanding what. She held him close, breathing in his little boy's scent, thanking God he was safe. Pike came back as shadows grew long. He'd cleaned himself up at the stream, but Sarah could still see the wildness in him, the mountain man who'd killed to protect what was his. "There'll be more," he said quietly. "Word gets out about a cabin with supplies. A woman. They come like wolves in winter." "I know." He crouched before her, taking her hands. "You were brave today, fierce, but you shouldn't have to be. This ain't no life for—" "For what? For a woman, for a family." Sarah's chin came up. "Seems to me I handled myself fine." "You did. God knows you did."
But what if Thomas had been outside? What if there'd been more of them? What if I hadn't heard the shot? His hands tightened on hers. I won't let nothing happen to you, either of you. Sarah saw the fear in his eyes then. Not for himself. Pike didn't fear death, but for them, for the family he'd found himself with against all expectation. So what do we do? Pike stood, pacing like a caged animal. Come spring, I'll take you to town. Get you passage to your sister. It's safer there, more civilized. Thomas can go to school, have friends his age. You can have a real life. Not this. He gestured at the cabin, the isolation, the blood soaked into the snow outside. Is that what you want? Sarah asked carefully. For us to leave? Pike stopped pacing, back to her. What I want don't matter. It does to me. He turned then, and the raw emotion on his face took her breath. What I want is to keep you, both of you, forever. What I want is to wake up every morning knowing you're safe under my roof. What I want is to teach Thomas everything I know, watch him grow strong and good. What I want is... He stopped, jaw working. What? Sarah prompted softly. What I want is for you to be my wife, real and proper, not because of some bargain, but because you choose it. Choose me. But that's selfish, and I won't. Sarah stood and crossed to him, putting her fingers over his lips. Josiah Pike, you listen to me. I shot a man today. I'd shoot a dozen more to protect my son. You think I'm some delicate flower needs protecting? He caught her hand, held it. I know you ain't. That's what scares me. You're brave enough to stay, even if it ain't best for you. Maybe what's best for me is being with a man who'd face down 4 killers to protect us. Maybe what's best for Thomas is having a father who'll teach him to be strong and good. Maybe what's best is the family we've already made. Sarah. I'm not leaving, Josiah, not come spring, not ever, unless you send me away. I won't, couldn't. Then stop trying to decide what's best for me. I'm a grown woman who's survived plenty. Let me choose for myself. They stood close, his hands framing her face now, thumbs brushing her cheeks. You sure this life? It's hard, dangerous, lonely. I've been lonely in a crowd, Sarah said. Been in danger in civilization. As for hard, everything worth having is hard. Thomas's voice piped up from by the fire. Mama, Pa, why are you standing so close? The tension broke. Pike laughed, actually laughed, and swept the boy up into his arms. Because your mama's lecturing me, little man. She's good at that. Is she winning? Pike met Sarah's eyes over Thomas's head. Yeah, boy, I think she is. That night, after Thomas was asleep, they sat together by the fire. The day's violence seemed distant now, a storm that had passed. Pike had his arm around Sarah's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. They weren't the first men I've killed, Pike said quietly. Won't be the last, probably. That bother you? No, we do what we must to survive, to protect what's ours. What's ours? He repeated, wonder in his voice. Never thought I'd have an ours again. Sarah turned to face him. You do now, if you want it. I want it, he said simply. Want you. Want the life we could build. Want to wake up 20 years from now with you still lecturing me about deciding things for you. Just 20 years. 50, however many God gives us. Sarah kissed him then, soft and sure. It wasn't their first kiss. That had been tentative, questioning. This was answer and promise both. When they pulled apart, Pike's eyes were bright. I love you, he said, words rough as if pulled from deep inside. Don't know when it happened. Maybe when you stayed through my fever. Maybe when you stood between Thomas and danger with nothing but courage. Maybe the first night when you walked through my door, half froze but still fighting. But I love you, Sarah Bennett, and I'll spend whatever years I got left proving it. I love you too, Sarah whispered. Not because you saved us,
Not because of any bargain, but because you're the man who carves toys for a lonely boy, who teaches with patience, who builds his walls high but lets us inside them anyway. They stayed by the fire late into the night, planning a different future than either had imagined. Come spring, they'd go to town not for goodbye but for supplies. Maybe they'd add rooms for the children that might come. Maybe they'd get a few head of cattle, expand the garden. The bodies in the snow were a reminder that their life wouldn't be easy. More trouble would come, but Sarah had proven she could face it, and Pike had proven he'd die before letting harm come to his family. His family? The word still seemed miraculous to him. Sarah could tell, but they were true, forged in hardship, tested by violence, but real as the mountains themselves. Tomorrow they'd deal with the practical matters, the horses to tend, the weapons to clean, the story to settle for any authorities who might ask. But tonight, they were just a man and woman in love, planning a life together while their son slept safe nearby. The fire burned low, casting long shadows. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but the cabin stood strong against the darkness. Inside, a new family was taking root, tough and enduring as the Montana mountains themselves. Spring came slowly to the mountains, ice giving way to mud, white to brown, and finally green. The day Pike announced they'd make the trip to town, Sarah felt her stomach knot with anxiety she couldn't quite name. "Need supplies," he said over breakfast. "Seeds for planting, flour, coffee, few other things." His eyes met hers meaningfully. "Legal things." A marriage license. He meant to make it proper, official. Sarah's heart warmed even as her nerves jangled. Town meant people, questions, judgment. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if weather holds. Snow's melted enough on the low trails." Thomas bounced with excitement. "Can I ride Star?" He'd named one of the horses taken from the dead men, a gentle mare that had taken to him. "We'll see," Pike said, but his smile gave away the answer. They set out at dawn, Thomas riding with Pike on his big roan, Sarah on the mare. The journey took most of the day, following trails Sarah couldn't have found alone. Pike pointed out landmarks, teaching her the way. "Case you ever need to come alone," he said. "Planning on leaving me?" she teased. His face went serious. "Planning on you knowing how to survive anything, just in case." The words sobered her. Their life was still dangerous. Would always be. But she appreciated his practical care, the way he prepared her for all possibilities while hoping for none of them. Silver Creek appeared around a bend, a rough collection of buildings that passed for civilization in these parts. Maybe 40 structures, including a general store, saloon, church, and what might generously be called a hotel. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Sarah could see people moving about their business. Her hands tightened on the reins. "Steady," Pike murmured. "You're with me. That's all that matters." But as they rode down the main street, Sarah felt the weight of stares. Women paused in their errands to whisper behind hands. Men lounging outside the saloon watched with knowing smirks. Everyone knew Pike. It seemed the mountain man who'd lived alone since his wife died, and here he was with a woman and child. At the general store, Pike helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "Chin up," he said quietly. "You're worth 10 of any of them." Inside, Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife, looked Sarah up and down with sharp eyes. "Well, Josiah Pike, haven't seen you in town with company before." "Sarah, this is Martha Henderson," Pike said evenly. "Martha, Sarah Bennett and her boy Thomas." "Bennett," Martha's eyes glinted. "Not Pike." "Not yet," Pike said, meeting her gaze steady. "Aim to fix that while we're here." Martha's expression shifted, calculating. "That's so well?" She turned to Sarah. "You're the widow got caught in that early storm. Aren't you heard tell Pike took you in?" "He saved our lives,"
Sarah said, finding her voice. "We'd have frozen certain sure." "Mm-hmm. And you've been living up at his cabin all winter, just the three of you." The implication hung heavy. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her head high. "Mister, Pike has been nothing but proper and kind. We've been keeping house while he provided shelter." "Keeping house?" Martha repeated, clearly not believing a word. "Well, I suppose that's one way to put it." Pike stepped forward, something dangerous in his stance. "You got something to say. Martha, say it plain." The woman stepped back. "No offense meant. Mr. Pike, just surprised is all. You been alone so long. Folks figured—" "Well, never mind what folks figured." "Good idea," Pike growled. They completed their purchases in tense silence. Sarah selected seeds, fabric, coffee, and other necessities, trying to ignore Martha's judgmental gaze. Thomas, bless him, chattered happily about everything he saw, oblivious to the undercurrents. Outside, loading the supplies, Sarah heard her name called. A woman about her age approached, dressed simply but clean, with kind eyes. "I'm Anna Morrison," she said. "I wanted to welcome you. Not everyone here is like Martha Henderson." Sarah blinked back sudden tears at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. I'm Sarah. I know how hard it can be, coming to a new place, especially under unusual circumstances." Anna glanced at Pike, who stood protectively close. "Mister, Pike's a good man. Helped my husband once when claim jumpers tried to run us off. Don't let gossips tell you different." "I won't," Sarah promised. "The circuit preacher comes through next week," Anna continued. "If you're looking to make things official, he's a good man too. Won't ask questions that ain't his business." Pike cleared his throat. "Appreciate the information, Mrs. Morrison." Anna smiled. "You both come for supper sometime. After next week, I make a fair venison stew, and Lord knows we could all use more friends out here." As Anna walked away, Sarah felt something ease in her chest. Not everyone would judge. There were good people here too, people who understood that life in the territories didn't follow the same rules as back east. At the land office, Pike conducted his business with the clerk, a nervous young man who kept glancing at Sarah. When Pike mentioned needing the circuit preacher, the clerk's eyes widened. "Congratulations, Mr. Pike. I'll make sure Reverend Davis knows to find you." "One more thing," Pike said, pulling out a paper. "Want to add names to my claim? Sarah Bennett and Thomas Bennett, soon to be Pike." The clerk nodded, making notations. It was official then. Pike was claiming them as surely as he'd claimed his land. Their last stop was the saloon. Sarah started to protest, but Pike shook his head. "Need to make something clear. Wait here." He strode through the batwing doors. Sarah heard his voice, low and carrying. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. A warning. When he came back out, several men followed to the doorway, watching. Pike helped her onto the mare, then lifted Thomas up. As they rode out, he nodded once to the watching men. Message delivered, whatever it was. "What did you tell them?" Sarah asked when they cleared town. "That you're under my protection. Official-like or not, you're mine. Anyone treats you or the boy with disrespect answers to me. I can fight my own battles." "I know you can. Seen you do it, but you shouldn't have to. Not from them." They camped that night halfway home, Thomas asleep between them under the stars. Sarah lay awake, thinking about the day. The judgment, yes, but also the kindness. Anna Morrison's welcome. The young clerk's congratulations. Even Martha Henderson, for all her disapproval, had sold them goods fair and square. "You're thinking loud," Pike murmured. "Just processing. It was a lot." "Too much. We don't have to go back. Can get supplies sent up. Have the preacher come to us." Sarah rolled to face him. "No, Anna invited us to supper. Thomas needs to know other children. We need to be part of the world, even if it's just a little.
You sure people can be cruel, especially to women who don't follow their rules. Let them talk. I know the truth. You know, Thomas knows. God knows. That's all that matters.
Pike reached across Thomas to take her hand. How'd I get so lucky? Finding a woman with backbone made of steel.
Maybe we both got lucky. No, maybe about it.
The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah altered Elizabeth's wedding dress to fit, her hands shaking as she worked. It felt strange, wearing a dead woman's dress, but also right somehow, like Elizabeth was giving her blessing. Pike disappeared for a full day, returning with wildflowers and a mysterious wrapped package. "For after," was all he'd say. The morning of the preacher's arrival, Sarah woke to find Thomas already dressed in his best clothes, practically vibrating with excitement. "Today you really become my PA?" he asked Pike over breakfast.
"If the preacher shows," Pike said,
but he was smiling.
"And if your mama doesn't come to her senses and run off?"
"Mama wouldn't run," Thomas said confidently. "She loves you." The simple truth from a child's lips made Pike's eyes suspiciously bright. He cleared his throat roughly. "Well, better get ready then." Reverend Davis arrived just past noon, a weathered man with kind eyes who seemed unsurprised by the situation. He performed the ceremony right there in the cabin, with Thomas as witness and the mountains watching through the windows. "Do you, Josiah Pike, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" "I do." Pike's voice was rock steady, his eyes never leaving Sarah's. "Do you, Sarah Bennett, take this man to be your lawful wedded husband?" "I do." The words came out sure and strong. "By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." Pike kissed her then, sweet and fierce, while Thomas cheered when they broke apart. Sarah saw tears on her husband's weathered face. "Don't know why you're crying, Pa," Thomas said. "This is happy."
"Sometimes men cry when they're happy, little man," Pike said, scooping him up, "when they get more than they ever dreamed of."
After the preacher left with his fee and a package of Sarah's biscuits, Pike presented his mysterious gift. Sarah unwrapped it to find a silver brush and mirror set, delicate and fine. "Was in the city last year, before you," he said awkwardly. "Saw it and thought maybe someday I'd have cause to give it. Then figured I never would. But here we are." Sarah threw her arms around him, this rough man who'd bought her beautiful things just in hope. "I love it. I love you." "I love you too, Mrs. Pike, both of you." That night, Thomas insisted on calling them Mama and Papa at least a dozen times, delighting in the officialness of it. When he finally fell asleep, Sarah and Pike sat by the fire, her in his lap, comfortable in a way that would have seemed impossible months ago. "No regrets?" he asked.
"None.
Only that I didn't find you sooner. All those wasted years alone." "Not wasted. They made you who you are, the man I love."
"Sweet talker,"
he accused, but his arms tightened around her. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, wolves sang to the rising moon. But inside the cabin, a family sat complete and content, no longer bound by bargains or desperation, but by choice and love and the promise of all the years to come. Summer had settled over the mountains like a warm blanket, bringing with it long days and the constant buzz of life. Sarah had just finished hanging laundry when she noticed Thomas wasn't by the creek where he'd been catching minnows. "Thomas," she called, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "Where are you, sweetheart?" No answer. Her heart began to race. Pike was at the far meadow, cutting hay for winter feed. She was alone. "Thomas Bennett Pike, you answer me right now." Still nothing. Sarah grabbed the rifle and began searching. Calling his name, the forest seemed to swallow her voice. Every shadow could be a bear, a wolf,
Worse, her little boy alone out there. She found his tracks leading into the woods, following a deer trail. Of course. He'd been fascinated by the deer that came to drink at the creek. Without thinking, she plunged after him. An hour later, she admitted she was lost. The trees all looked the same, and in her panic, she'd paid no attention to landmarks. Thomas's tracks had disappeared in the pine needles. Terror clawed at her throat. "Thomas, please, baby, answer Mama." Then she heard it, a weak cry to her left. She crashed through the underbrush to find Thomas huddled at the base of a massive pine, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "Mama." He threw himself into her arms. "I got lost. I followed a pretty bird, and then I couldn't find home." Sarah held him tight, relief making her knees weak. "It's all right. I've got you, but now we need to find our way back." She tried to retrace their steps, but nothing looked familiar. The sun was starting to sink, and she knew Pike would be home soon, would find them gone. He'd search, but these woods were vast. That's when she noticed Thomas was burning up. "My head hurts, Mama," he whimpered. "And my tummy." Fear of a different kind gripped her. She felt his forehead. Definitely fever. Out here, with the night coming, fever could mean death. Sarah made a decision. She found a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock, gathered pine needles for bedding, and settled Thomas as comfortable as possible. Then she loaded the rifle and prepared to wait, praying Pike would find them before. She wouldn't think about before what. Thomas's fever climbed as darkness fell. He thrashed and muttered, calling for his papa. Sarah had water in her canteen, but nothing else. No willow bark for fever, no food, no blankets. "Stay with me, baby," she whispered, holding him close. "Papa will find us. He'll come." The night was endless. Every sound could be predators drawn by the scent of sickness and fear. Sarah kept the rifle ready, though she knew one gun wouldn't stop a determined bear or wolf pack. Thomas grew worse. His skin burned, and he stopped responding to her voice. Sarah found herself praying harder than she ever had, bargaining with God for her child's life. Then, like a miracle, she heard it, Pike's voice, calling their names. She screamed back, spending every bit of air in her lungs. "Here, we're here, Thomas is sick." Crashing through the brush, then Pike's lantern piercing the darkness. He took in the scene in one glance and dropped beside them. "How long has he been like this?" "Hours." The fever came on sudden. Pike touched Thomas's face, and Sarah saw fear flash in his eyes. Without a word, he scooped up the boy. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Stay close. We're 2 miles from home." 2 miles. She'd wandered that far in her panic. Pike moved through the darkness like he was born to it. Sarah stumbling behind. Thomas lay limp in his arms, occasionally whimpering. At the cabin, Pike worked with desperate efficiency. He stripped Thomas, bathing him with cool water while Sarah made willow bark tea. They forced it between the boy's lips, drop by precious drop. "Should have watched him better," Sarah said, tears flowing. "Should have." "Stop." Pike's voice was firm but gentle. "Boys wander. Happens to every parent. You found him. That's what matters." They worked through the night, taking turns bathing Thomas with cool water, keeping the fever from taking him completely. Pike told stories to the unconscious boy, his voice breaking when Thomas didn't respond. "Can't lose another son," he whispered at one point. "Please, God, not another one." Dawn came gray and uncertain. Thomas's fever had stopped climbing but hadn't broken. He lay between them, so small and still that Sarah had to keep checking his breathing. "There's a doctor," Pike said suddenly. "In Cedar Falls. Day's ride. Maybe less if I push hard." "That's too far." "It's his only chance if the fever don't break soon." Sarah looked at her son's flushed face, made her decision. "We all go. I won't be separated from him." Pike nodded. They wrapped Thomas in blankets, and Pike held him while Sarah rode behind, arms around them both. They pushed the horses hard, stopping only to drip water into Thomas's mouth. Cedar Falls was larger than Silver Creek, almost a real town. The doctor, a young man named Walsh, took one look at Thomas and ushered them inside. Fever this high. Could be several things, he said, examining the boy. But I think, yes, see this rash scarlet fever, most likely serious, but treatable if caught in time. He mixed medicines with practiced hands. He'll need constant care, cool baths, these medicines every 4 hours, and prayer wouldn't hurt. They rented a room above the general store. For 3 days, Sarah and Pike took turns nursing Thomas, following the doctor's instructions religiously. The fever raged, peaked, then finally, blessedly, broke. Thomas opened clear eyes on the 4th morning. "Mama, Papa, why are we in a strange room?" Sarah burst into tears, and Pike had to turn away to compose himself. Their boy was back. "Doctor," Walsh proclaimed him out of danger but weak. "He'll need rest, good food, time to recover. Don't push him too hard." While Thomas recovered, they were stuck in Cedar Falls. It gave Sarah a glimpse of what life could be in a bigger settlement. Actual shops, a school, other families. She saw children Thomas's age playing in the streets and wondered. "You're thinking about staying," Pike said one evening, watching her watch the town from their window. "No," Sarah said, but Pike knew her too well. "Would be safer, better for Thomas' school, friends, opportunities. His family is in the mountains, his home. Home can be anywhere we make it." Sarah turned to him. "You'd do that, leave your mountains for us." "I'd live in hell itself if that's where you and Thomas needed to be." Sarah kissed him, long and sweet. "Our home is that cabin, where we became a family, where you taught him to be strong, where I fell in love with you. That's home." "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They started back the next week, Thomas still weak but improving. The journey took twice as long with frequent stops, but finally, their cabin came into view. "Home!" Thomas cried, then immediately asked, "Can I see if my minnows are still in the bucket?" Some things never changed. That night, with Thomas safely asleep in his bed, Sarah and Pike stood outside looking at the stars. "We almost lost him," Sarah said quietly. "But we didn't. He's strong, like his mama." "I've never been so scared." Pike pulled her close. "Fear's part of loving someone. Means you got something worth losing. But we faced it together. That's what families do." Sarah thought about the fever-bright nights, Pike's steady presence, the way they'd worked as one to save their son. They'd been tested by more than weather or hardship. They'd been tested by the possibility of loss, and they'd survived. "I want more children," she said suddenly. "Brothers and sisters for Thomas. I want this cabin full of life and laughter." Pike's arms tightened around her. "You sure after what we just went through?" "Because of what we just went through, life's uncertain, but love makes it worth the risk. Then we'll have more, many as God sees fit to give us, and we'll love them all as fierce as we love Thomas. And if fever comes again, or accidents, or all the dangers of this life, then we'll face them together, like we always do." Sarah leaned into his strength, watching stars wheel overhead. Thomas was safe. They were home, and their family, tested by fear and illness, had emerged stronger. Inside the cabin, Thomas called out in his sleep. Not a nightmare, just looking for reassurance. Sarah went to him, smoothing his hair, whispering that Mama and Papa were here, always here. Pike stood in the doorway, watching them, and Sarah saw the contentment on his face. This was what he'd thought lost forever, a family to protect, to cherish, to build a future with. The mountains stood eternal around them, but it was the bonds within these log walls that would endure. They'd learned that love wasn't just the easy times. It was the desperate nights, the fearful searches, the relief of a fever breaking. It was choosing each other, again and again. No matter what came. 2 years had passed since Thomas's illness, and the cabin that once housed a desperate bargain now rang with laughter. Sarah's belly rounded with new life, and Thomas, now 6, had grown sturdy and strong under Pike's teaching. "Pa, look what I caught!" Thomas burst through the door, proudly displaying a fat trout. Pike grinned, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's a beauty. Son, you remember how I taught you to gut it?" "Yes, sir. Make the cut shallow so you don't pierce the innards." Sarah watched them from her seat by the window, hand resting on her swollen middle. The baby would come soon, their second child together, after losing one to miscarriage the previous winter. That loss had tested them, but like everything else, they'd weathered it together. A movement outside caught her eye. "Josiah," she called quietly. "Someone's coming." Pike was at the window instantly, rifle in hand, but then he relaxed. "It's Anna Morrison, and looks like, hell, that's a whole wagon train." They went outside to meet their visitor. Anna smiled warmly, though her eyes held concern. "Sarah, Mr. Pike, sorry to intrude, but there's a situation. Wagon train got caught by early snow in the high passes. 20 families, including children. They're in bad shape, need shelter, food, whatever folks can spare." Pike's jaw tightened. Sarah knew his instinct was to protect what was his, to maintain their isolation. But she also knew the man he'd become. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad. Lost 2 children already to the cold. More will die if we don't help." Sarah touched Pike's arm. "The new cabin," she said softly. Last summer, Pike had built a second cabin 50 yards from the first, planning for their growing family. It stood empty now, waiting. Pike nodded slowly. "Send them here. The second cabin will hold 1 family at least. We got meat smoked, vegetables stored. Won't let children starve." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Bless you both. I knew you'd help." Within hours, their quiet homestead transformed. A family of 5, the Carters took shelter in the new cabin. The father, Ben, had frostbitten hands. The mother, Mary, clutched a baby while trying to coral 2 other young ones. "I can't thank you enough," Mary said, tears streaming. "We thought, when the snow came so early." "No thanks needed," Sarah said firmly. "We help each other out here. That's how it works." Pike and Ben worked together to stable the oxen and shore up shelter. Thomas, thrilled to have other children around, immediately befriended the Carter boys, showing them his fishing spots and teaching them what Pike had taught him. Over the next days, more families found temporary refuge nearby. Pike organized hunting parties, while Sarah coordinated food distribution with the other women. Their isolated cabin became the center of a small, desperate community. One evening, Sarah found Pike standing outside, watching the glow from multiple campfires. "It's like a small town," she said, slipping her hand into his. "Too many people," he muttered, but without real heat. "You love it," Sarah accused gently. "Being needed, having purpose beyond just us." Pike pulled her close. "Maybe. Still be glad when they move on come spring." "Will you really?" He was quiet for a moment. "That Ben Carter, he's talking about staying in the area, starting a settlement. Wants to know if I'd help lay out the town, given I know the land." Sarah's heart jumped. A town meant school for Thomas, other women to talk to, a doctor closer than a day's ride. But it also meant the end of their splendid isolation. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think on it. Talk to my wife." "And what does your wife think?" Sarah considered. "I think Thomas needs other children. I think our new baby deserves choices we didn't have. And I think maybe it's time Josiah Pike stopped hiding from the world." "I ain't hiding," he protested. "No, then what do you call it?" Pike sighed. "Protection, from disappointment, from loss, from..."
From life, Sarah finished. But life found us anyway. Didn't it, good and bad both?
That night, the first birth pains started. Sarah tried to hide them, not wanting to worry anyone, but Pike knew her too well. It's time.
I think so.
Mary Carter, experienced with birthing, took charge. The other women helped, creating a circle of support Sarah had never expected to find in these mountains. Pike paced outside like a caged bear, Thomas clinging to his hand. "Will Mama be all right?" Thomas asked. "Your Mama's the strongest woman I know." Pike said, "She'll be fine." The labor was long, but not complicated. As dawn broke, a healthy cry announced the arrival of Elizabeth Sarah Pike, named for the past and present both.
A daughter,
Mary announced, placing the bundle in Pike's massive arms. Perfect as a spring morning. Pike stared down at the tiny face, and Sarah saw him fall in love all over again. Thomas peered at his sister with wonder.
"She's so small,"
he breathed. "Was I that small?" "Smaller," Sarah said, exhausted but happy. "But look how big and strong you are now." The wagon train families celebrated the birth like it was their own good fortune. Food appeared from nowhere. Small gifts, offers of help. Sarah realized this was what they'd been missing. Community. Over the next weeks, as Sarah recovered and baby Elizabeth thrived, plans solidified. Several families, including the Carters, decided to stay. They'd build a proper settlement, with Pike's help choosing the best locations. "We'll call it Pike's Crossing," Ben suggested. But Pike shook his head. "New hope," he said. "That's what this place is. New hope for all of us." Sarah caught his eye and smiled. The man who'd once claimed her with a desperate bargain about sons now stood surrounded by families he'd helped save. The transformation was complete. Spring arrived with its usual mix of mud and promise. The new settlement began taking shape, cabins going up, garden plots marked out. Pike threw himself into the work with surprising enthusiasm, his knowledge of the land invaluable. Their own cabin expanded too, a real bedroom for Thomas, a nursery for Elizabeth, a larger main room for the family that would likely continue growing. The old cabin, site of so much struggle and change, remained at the heart of it all. One evening, as purple shadows stretched across the valley, Sarah found Pike by the stream where she'd first fetched water years ago. Elizabeth slept in a sling against her chest while Thomas helped his father set trap lines. "Any regrets?" she asked, echoing his old question. Pike wrapped an arm around her. "Not a one. You—"
"Never." She leaned into him. "Though I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd kept walking that night. Found another cabin, another life."
"You'd have survived," Pike said simply. "You're a survivor, but I'd have stayed broken, alone, half dead inside." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You saved me more than I saved you." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected. "That's what partners do." Thomas ran up, chattering about the tracks he'd found. Maybe fox or bobcat. Pike listened seriously, asking questions, teaching always teaching. Elizabeth stirred, making the little sounds that meant she'd want feeding soon. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned with William, not the one she'd feared with Pike, but something altogether different. Richer, harder in some ways, easier in others, real in a way that mattered. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in the growing settlement, she could hear hammering, children laughing, the sounds of civilization taking root in the wilderness. But here, by the stream, it was just them, the family forged from desperation and loneliness, tempered by hardship, and finally shaped by love. The mountain man who'd demanded sons, and the widow who'd had nothing left to give except courage. They'd both gotten so much more than they'd bargained for. "Come on," Pike said, scooping up Thomas. "Supper's waiting, and your mama makes the best biscuits in the territory." "In the whole world," Thomas corrected. They walked back to their cabin, smoke rising from the chimney, lamplight warm in the windows. Home. Not just a shelter from storms anymore, but a true home. A place where love lived, where children grew strong, where the future spread out as vast and promising as the Montana sky. Sarah paused at the door, looking back at the mountains that had brought them together. "Thank you," she whispered to whatever force had guided her here that desperate night. Then she followed her family inside, ready for whatever adventures tomorrow might bring. After all, they'd survived the worst already. Everything else was just living, and they'd gotten very good at that indeed. In the years to come, Pike's Crossing would grow into a proper town. Thomas would become a teacher, Elizabeth a healer. More children would bless their home, and sometimes, on cold winter nights, Sarah would tell the story of how she'd stumbled half-frozen to a cabin door and found not just shelter, but a love strong enough to build a life on. It always started the same way. Your papa was the biggest man I'd ever seen, standing in that doorway like a mountain himself. And Pike would smile, add his own details, and together they'd weave the tale of how two broken people had found wholeness in each other, here at the edge of the world, where the mountains touched the sky and miracles sometimes wore buckskin and beard. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed following Sarah and Pike's journey from a desperate bargain to true love, we'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let us know where you're listening from. It's always amazing to see how these frontier tales reach people all around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of courage, survival, and romance from America's frontier days. Share your thoughts about Sarah and Pike's story. What touched you most? We read every comment and love connecting with fellow fans of these timeless tales.